How do you know you are ready to upgrade from your starter piston compressor to a high-efficiency screw compressor? When you meet Atlas Copco's new G2-7, our smallest oil-injected rotary screw compressor gives you immediate benefits in 4 areas: duty cycle, cost of ownership, oil carryover, and noise level. That means the G2-7 is quieter, cleaner, and more economical to own while working longer hours. How's that for convincing? First, the new G is designed and built for continuous use. You can run it 24/7, even in temperatures up to 46 degrees Celsius. Piston compressors, on the other hand, need cool-down periods. This means that they can only produce air about 70% of the time. Running pistons longer than that will increase wear and the risk of premature failures. Second, a screw compressor offers far lower total cost of ownership. Because energy costs eat up the bulk of your compressed air budget, the highly efficient G2-7 is much more economical overall than a piston compressor. The G comes with a powerful drivetrain that consists of a premium efficiency motor and a brand new in-house developed state-of-the-art element. Third, the G limits the oil content in your air system to protect your production tools and the quality of your final products. A typical piston compressor has an oil carryover of more than 30 ppm. The G produces less than 3 ppm. Finally, the G2-7 is much quieter than a piston compressor, thanks to its low-vibration screw element. This makes for a much more comfortable working environment. A piston compressor has a sound range of 80 to 85 decibels. The G reduces noise emissions with an impressive 20 decibels. That is the difference between a normal conversation and getting shouted at all day long. In short, the G2-7 will bring a new level of performance, comfort, efficiency, and sustainability to your shop floor. Are you ready to support your growing business with your first rotary screw compressor? Visit our website or contact your Atlas Copco representative today.